All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to Comic Book Radio. Thank you guys for being here. This is episode 178. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti, and tonight, my guest is NARWHAL, Per Berg. We're going to be talking about writing. What else would I talk to NARWHAL about? You get NARWHAL on your show, you talk about writing. That's how it goes. Now, before I do bring NARWHAL on, I want to show you guys one thing that arrived today. I didn't think it was going to arrive today. I thought it was going to arrive tomorrow or Friday. I break for Behemoth. And this is a glow-in-the-dark bumper sticker. The brighter parts glow. You can't see that because it's bright right now. That's not how glow-in-the-dark works. But I tell you, they glow in the dark. These were on the King Cryptid campaign. If you manage to get one, this will be coming to you soon. It's about 8x3. Beautiful, beautiful bumper sticker. Christian Rossi art. Good stuff. Do with it what you will. Bookmark, bumper sticker. Some other place to stick it. Whatever you do in the sanctity of your own home with your stickers is none of my business. None of it. So, before we bring on NARWHAL here, I want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Sark. Sark at 3 o'clock today. What's up, Sark? Pixel Trader 2, 3:30. NARWHAL also in the chat. How's it going, NARWHAL? Vaughn Coleman is here too. How's it going, Vaughn? Killer Kovac says everybody is live right now. Everybody's live right now? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. You know, this is an interesting channel. Perhaps we do have some undead viewers, but I hope they are all live, living, and doing well. Cole King looks awesome. Yeah, it came out great. They always do a great job every time, and I didn't expect it to arrive today, so they get it out. It's perfect. Looks beautiful, and they get it out really fast. So, kudos to who I use to get those done. Speaking of which, with stuff too, the Granite Beast resin figure. Check that out. It's on alternacomics.com. You can go to alternacomics.com/merch to take you right to it. Pick up the Granite Beast figure. That is in pre-order right now until March 31st. That would be the last day to get that. And then we're going to go to production. Based off those pre-order numbers, the glow-in-the-dark on the Granite Beast, just like all the other glow-in-the-darks that we did, will only be available during the pre-order part. So make sure if you want that glow-in-the-dark, you get that. Cole Kinks is going to put it in a short box and never use it, like all my stickers. You know, I feel you. I use some of them. But some of them, the ones and I know this is weird with stickers, but I guess it's not too weird. The ones I really like, I never stick anywhere. I keep them. I keep them forever. Unstuck. Hey, Arthur, how's it going? What's up? Arthur was the 3D sculptor of that Granite Beast. So go pick that up so we can put more 3D sculpting into Arthur's talented hands down the line. Make more of these. Blastbeat, what's up, Blastbeat? Hope you're doing well. And AL is here too. How's it going, AL? All right, without further ado, let's bring him on. The man of the hour, the guy you guys are all here for. Give him a big Comic Book Radio welcome. This is, I think, his third time on the show. NARWHAL, what's up?
Hey, I'm a friend of the show. Hey, if you have a glow-in-the-dark sticker, that means you got to stick it where the sun don't shine. I don't know if you said that, but I was thinking that while you were talking about those.
Yeah, I was gonna go there, but then I was like, well, you kind of want to stick it where the sun would shine because it charges it up real good. But then I was getting like literal with it in my own head, and I was like, I'll just let people.
That's like when you're too quick-witted, so you're already thinking ahead, like 2 or 3 steps.
Yeah, and then you don't say anything really.
Then they're
because
like, "What's Pete Samedi doing? He's just standing there with a blank face." You're like,
I just
I
am
have a rich inner
yeah,
life.
I'm responding to my own inner monologue.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
man, Narwhal, good to see you. What are you up to lately?
Just drawing. Earthbound is drawn. It's fulfilling, or it's crowdfunding now, and I'm lettering it. And I got a few other just background projects, but it's just comics still these days. Just doing lots of comics and stuff.
What's your typical day like? How often? How much time are you spending towards comic book production?
It's full time, but it is a little weird because I work from home and make my own schedule. Usually I'm way more productive in the morning and sometimes the evening, and whatever my style is, I crash in the afternoons, and I'll usually even like take a nap. But and then because you and me, we can relate to this, but if you're kind of more of the crowdfunding where you're doing everything, you're not just like drawing or writing. There's a lot of like working with printers, a lot of like emailing and various collaborations and stuff like that. It takes up a lot of the time too.
Yeah, you gotta. There's always different things that you have to do constantly, and half the time it feels like you're not doing what you want to do
Hmm.
and what's productive.
Yeah, and it's always stacking up, and it'll kind of stress me out. What I did recently too is I was like, I need to just cut some things off until I check off more things, because it's even hard when if it overloads, it can like paralyze you because you're thinking of shit. I got 6 things I should be doing. I can't decide which one to do. I just wasted all morning trying to decide which one to even work on. So like I've been one specifically speaking of writing, I'm kind of not writing right now for the first time in a few years. Even I'm like, I don't know how long this will
Oh
last,
well,
but
then
I'm
I have to kick you, Narwhal. We can't. I mean, I had you on here to talk about writing.
Yeah. No, I like it though that you thought of that because was thinking the other day, I was like, man, I think I might be pigeonholed as an artist and I'd rather be pigeonholed as a writer if I had to choose. And maybe you could be like both or something, but, and pigeonholed is not even the right necessary term, but yeah, like, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about writing. I'm a writer. I'm a little bit over the phase of what with writing. It's like the self identity thing. Like I tried it at a bar once. I was like, if I want to be a writer, I need to say out loud that I'm a writer to a stranger and see how it feels. And I was talking to this logger, and he's like, "So what do you do?" And I was like, "I'm a writer." I had never written anything, or I'd written just crap. And he's like, "You're a writer, huh?" And I was like 21 or whatever. He's like, "You should write my life story. It'd be called I Almost Died." And he chugged a beer as he was saying it.
I'm questioning. Did that really happen? I'm questioning whether or not it did.
So I swear that particular story actually happened. That guy was crazy. And there was
Oh,
other stuff he said that was crazy after that too. I
oh
couldn't
well,
believe
sounds like an
it.
interesting feller.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always think of writing in terms of when I think of you. I don't think of. I mean, you're a storyteller, but and you do have a distinctive art style. But writing is always, and I don't know if it's because we always have these conversations about writing, but that's my go-to when
Hmm.
I think of you. I think of writing and plotting and character development and world building and different techniques being used. That's always where I go to. Um, when you're kind of going about that and you're getting in the zone for your writing. Now I know you're saying you got that on the back burner, but we're going to be talking about this tonight. Uh, when you're in the zone on your writing, where do you generally start?
Yeah. So it goes through a period of kind of brainstorming and just taking little notes of like I keep it under a little file just in my notebook called itches I want to scratch sometimes. And it could be like genres or like I have one thing written, it's like a story that sneaks up on you, which is like that's kind of like Harry, what's it? Shaggy Dog story, like that Shaggy Dog detective thing where you don't really know what the story's about, like until like the end almost, and then you're kind of like, what even was that? But like um, the Big Lebowski's a little bit like that. So I'll be
Mm.
kind of thinking of these things, and then they'll kind of rise to the top. They stick around certain ideas, and they'll get a little more developed. And it gets to the point where you feel like you could start trying to tackle a first draft. And I'll usually have something that's at that phase that I'm kind of chipping away at. Um, That's kind of the basic of how it starts. It's a lot of like notebooks and notes and stuff.
Are you someone who you're whenever you constantly get ideas or something that you come upon, you write it down, or do you just store that away in your head and then they get lost? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I'll try to write it down, and it is like, if they really deserve to stick around, they'll kind of keep coming up, and I'll write them down a couple times because I don't usually go back through my notebooks very often, but just writing them down does kind of help you remember it. And then yeah, like as far as ideas, the actual inspiration where you're like, oh, that's like a good idea. I feel like that only happens like once or twice a year, and it might just be for a short story. But some of the other stuff, if it is more like a big uh, globule type thing that slowly gets developed, and then the actual inspiration can come once you're within that idea. But the idea itself to start might not be like so great. It might be like, I really want to write a detective story, is like what you write down, but there's no actual inspiration there yet, but some of that can come later.
So, do your ideas stem more from plot or character?
It's usually a little more from plot, and I've been wanting to look into more ways to get it even like the character kind of thing. Another thing, even a little bit beyond or different than the plot or the character, sometimes it's like specifically the idea, and the idea itself is like the thing I want to explore. And like that for Earthbound, one example is for the Earthbound 1, it's the R types. It's like guns that if you shoot someone, they join your team. And there's two guns, and they're each come to Earth, and they're forming a team that's eventually going to have to fight. And it's one is a purple gun and one is a green gun. So that's kind of the idea. And then there's like a bunch of ideas that come from that. You're like, oh, he could like try and shoot the president, and he could try and take over the world, or you could. And I'm like, what happens if you get shot by both guns? What would happen then? So all like that's like the story. The goal of the story almost becomes to fully explore that idea is like part of it.
What do you mean by that with guns?
Yeah, like well, with Earthbound with the R types, it's like Julian Spaceman come to Earth. He has uh the pink one, and yeah, it's like if you shoot someone, they like join your team. It's like mind control gun kind of.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, and she has someone a green one that makes people join her team.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a magic system, quote unquote, but it's just one rule. But then there are like lots of little ways that it could play out that are kind of fun. Like if you're stranded, somewhere, you could run to the highway, blast someone, take their car, and then you may or may not be stuck with them. You could tell them to wait by the highway, or you could keep them as like someone kind of helping you a little bit.
How'd you come up with that concept?
Actually, I'm trying to remember. It was because originally the story was actually two snipers, and it was originally like like me and a friend, a kind of different project. We were trying to sort of ship it around to Hollywood, but this is like 15 years ago, like way long time ago, and that was like a horror movie. But it was like eventually that would get rewritten and completely changed by me, and it would become Earthbound. But one of the notes of that, which had snipers, it was like a sniper horror movie kind of. And one guy was like, I can't make it because it's too violent. So if you can think of a way to make it less violent, which is funny about a sniper thing. But that was my idea to make it less violent, was to switch it to mind control bullets instead of death bullets or what, like regular bullets.
Death bullets.
Yeah.
I guess depending where they hit you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting in terms of that they're like these mind control things. Are they like darts? Are they invisible? Are they like energy? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. I wrote some of it in the story. I think of it's like energy bullets, kind of like they don't have like bullets that you load, so it's like that. But then I think I don't know if it was a cut or not, but there's a line where someone says like, how does like the process happen or whatever, and they say like the first order comes with the bullet. So if you shoot someone, then they have whatever your first thing you want them to do is kind of, they catch that basically.
Okay, so it kind of makes like a zombie out of them. You control
Ye-
them.
yeah, and
I don't mean
it's
like a
a
zombie, like undead zombie. I mean more like the traditional folklore zombie where you control this individual.
yeah, but you don't even. It's kind of like playing with the free will. Like they switch to a version of themselves where that is what they'd actually want to do. So you don't have to micromanage them if you blast them. Like they become like they're
Oh,
like
okay.
working in your best interests from that point.
And the concept of Earthbound, how'd you come up with that?
Yeah, so that was from another like note from this old script, which is the horror sniper script. There was a really shady Hollywood producer that nothing ever came of this, and I don't even know if he was a real producer. We were both like just sort of trying to sort of break into Hollywood, but we didn't even live in Hollywood. So we randomly kind of through a couple different connections met one kind of creepy producer type, and he's like, uh, I can really do something with this, kids, but there's one problem. The script, it needs to be more like Guardians of the Galaxy. And we're like, that would completely change it. That's completely different than a low budget horror sniper movie or whatever. And, and so at that
That's
point,
Hollywood for you.
yeah. And at that point, my partner, he had some other stuff going, some other movie projects. He kind of told me, he's like, I'm done with this one. If you want to do that rewrite, you can. And so I did it. So I rewrote it. And then it was just sitting there. And that was Earthbound. So it was me trying to make it less violent and more Guardians of the Galaxy. And then it ended up being Earthbound. And that still sat there. We actually, I never sent it to the producer. It sat for another like 4 years or so, and it was just sitting there. But that I always knew that was the first thing I'd written that wasn't terrible, or that like I reread it like 6 months later, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of like it. And as you're learning, it doesn't always feel like that. You reread stuff and you're like, oh, that wasn't so good. But that one was like first thing I'd written. It was decent. So I turned 30. I'm 37 now. So when I turned 30, I was like, I got to start like a big project and like finish it because I want like something to really show for creative endeavors or whatever. And I was like, okay, Earthbound can be a comic. Originally we were thinking of it being a movie, but that's not really going to happen. So let's do it as a comic. And I had been doing a fair amount of comic stuff in my 20s too, but that was the first time like really jumping in, and it was a little intimidating. Some of the such a big project and wondering if you're even going to finish it, kind of thing. But you kind of got to say F it and just do it or whatever. And that energy sort of helped that story a little bit too.
Oh yeah, yeah. You do have to just do it, And there's a lot of people that I think they put stuff aside and they never get to it because it's just never good enough, or it's never ready enough, or there's an excuse after excuse after excuse, and then you look back and you're like, wow, it's been years. I should have just kind of started it and let it evolve.
Yeah.
And because it's going to do that anyway, and you find that out once you do start it. But there's a lot of people that I think they put that off.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, there's a lot of things that are like that, and then they come back to it eventually one day, and they wish they started a whole lot sooner.
Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit of a catch-22. It's like you got to jump in and make some bad stuff so you can get to the good stuff. But if you don't do that, you're never going to make good stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% true. Now, when you're coming up with the ideas that you're using for writing, I'm sure that you see this happen a lot among other writers too. Do you see that you're coming up with something that maybe sounds too familiar, too on the nose, too derivative?
oh yeah, and well, because sometimes I'll be like, oh, I just want to write. I just want to do something derivative, and then I'll kind of try, and then I realize, oh, this is boring. So usually, it has to have something for me that makes me think it's kind of special, and that will be where some of the inspiration comes from. Of course, you can be halfway through it, and then you will find something that is similar, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever I was thinking has been done. But and then you're like, ah. But for even in my case, like I do watch a ton of movies. I actually don't read a ton of comics. I read a lot of comics, but I watch more movies than I read comics. So usually with movies, I can catch that kind of stuff. I can avoid accidentally being kind of derivative or whatever.
Was there anything that when that happened to you, how'd you go about it? How'd you kind of steer out of doing like a rip-off version of whatever it might have been, or making it too similar to the thing that already existed? Because I think there's like three paths you go down when you go down that road and you're creating a story that might wear your influences too much on your sleeve, where you're either making like a rip-off, you're making something that feels like it's aping what it's trying to do, like it's too much imitating of whatever it is, the style, the look, the character, the development, the world. Or the third, which I think happens sometimes and people don't even realize they're doing it. Sometimes I read stuff and I'm like, this comes across almost like parody, and it's not intentional. And I think those are the three biggest avenues that it goes down when people go, oh, I really love whatever it is. And then they go and they want to make something that's like that. And as a publisher, I've gotten a lot of submissions that are like that, where people are like, I really love Batman, and then they go and they make something that is as close to Batman as it could be. And they're consciously doing that. They want to make like their Batman, and it's coming across like it's way too close to Batman.
Yeah. To where you almost read it as a parody. That's interesting. Yeah, you would definitely want to try and catch that. And hopefully sometimes that's the kind of thing, like, it would be a bummer if you're like halfway through a project and realize, but even if it's a script or whatever, then if you wait a few months and or give it to someone else, or email it to yourself, even sometimes we'll give you like the second eyes kind of, and you kind of realize all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is way too much. Like the one, I've had a few that are close like that. Like Cerberus is my talking dog story, and there's a lot of talking dog stories that are very legendary. There isn't even like, there isn't like 100. I can think of like 5. Like 101 Dalmatians, for example.
Oliver. All dogs go to heaven.
These kind of stories. So then you think like, okay, if I'm gonna do that, if I'm gonna throw my hat in that ring, I definitely want to hopefully bring something a little different to the table. And even with Cerberus, I felt pretty comfortable from the beginning, though, because of the kind of dogs where their senses are almost like superpowers, and each sense is kind of tied to a tense and how they solve the mystery that way. So like smell is tied to the past, where you can kind of almost look into the past with your nose of what's there and what happened there and everything. And eyes are almost tied to the future, like you can almost see what's coming. You can have a sense of foreboding or whatever. And ears are more tied to the present, is the way it kind of plays out in Cerberus. So with that concept, I was like, okay, I don't think if I saw a story that had done that concept, then I probably would be like, ooh, I need to go back to the drawing board, because this is the thing that's supposed to separate it from everything else.
And that's the tough part, isn't it? It's because so many things have been done.
Yeah.
Like crazy. And even if you're not aware of it, you could have read hundreds of books, hundreds of comics, seen hundreds or thousands of movies, and there still might lurk somewhere in the dark corners of creation the exact thing that you're making.
Yeah, if you have that feeling like, oh, this is a pretty good idea, you just know the second feeling is usually like, that means someone else has probably had it too, or will soon, so I gotta either be fast or something.
Yeah. Now, when you do come across that, or not just for you, but for others as well, what kind of advice could you give people? What kind of experiences have you had to steer clear of that? And also, what advice would you give to people who maybe find that they're going too down the road of being derivative or kind of copying off of their influences?
I read your title and I took basically just one note, and this gets into that a little bit, but the title being what's gone wrong with writing, and then what we're talking about here of how to possibly dodge this pitfall of having your work be a little too derivative. And this came up from talking with Ken and Joe and Julius the other week on my channel. We did a little writing thing. We were talking about like why manga is so addictive, and they brought it up, but then I kind of wrote down based on what they were saying. But what it kind of came down to is a lot of the really successful mangas is they kind of have an embarrassment of riches where if they choose to, they can speed through an entire awesome idea because they got a bunch of other awesome ideas waiting. So they don't even care. And you're like, wow, they just blew through an idea that could have been milked for like 100-page story, and they did it in 2 pages. And what do they do? And the other idea is like you can cut to any character and they could be the main character and it can be great or whatever. If you randomly did cut to anyone at any moment, just the feeling of that something good would be going on. And then what happens there is the audience gets a sense of trust, and then they will just give themselves over to the story kind of and relax, where they kind of quit being skeptical, which actually has a metaphor or like an analog to YouTube with audience retention. There's like a point where the trust clicks in, and there's a point where they're going to watch the whole video, and they like naturally make a decision in their head. And so I think the embarrassment of riches is one of the ways that you can do this if they have the sense that that's happening. And I think that would solve a little bit what you're talking about. So you would be trying to achieve, and this does tie into a little bit of world building, character stuff, where if you do all that work, then you would have the embarrassment of riches. Then it kind of would be authentic no matter what. This applies to King Cryptid, by the way, just from the way I've heard you talk about it. That world feels like any character you'd be like, oh, I could read a graphic novel about them.
Every time, it's funny you say that. Every time I create a new character or introduce a new character, someone's like, is that going to be a spin-off? Is that going to have its own series one day? And I'm like, everything's in King Cryptid.
yeah. See, so that's cool. And that's like the embarrassment of riches thing. So you can definitely avoid this problem of being derivative from that is one thing. That would be like my advice a little bit, is you're trying to create that kind of.
Yeah, it seems like, and Stato brings it up, talking about the pacing in manga. It seems like, and I don't read a lot of manga. Hell, I haven't read manga in years. But it seems like it's a pacing thing where there's a very fast pace to it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but they can slow down randomly for things too. But yeah, they have that ability to go ridiculously fast.
So it's not this kind of American comics in the past 15 or so years where it's this decompressed storytelling. It's very condensed, very compressed.
Yeah, I think it's pretty compressed, and then on top of that, it's a long story. So it's even like sometimes, like if you're doing a live stream, if you're like, oh, how am I going to think of what to say it's only been 10 minutes and I got to do 2 hours. Like, how am I going to pull that off? But then the 2 hours happens and you end up making it. You're like, what did I say? I blacked out. But yeah, that's like manga is like so many great ideas in this little section, but then the whole story is this long. It'd be like kind of intimidating to think of it. Like, how would I even recreate that? But if you jump in with that mindset, you can kind of get there a little bit by, and some of it is just like basics, like good characters and good, like world building and stuff. I can think of one random example is, I just saw it the other day, but it's Columbo, which I love. We both love it. But I rewatched the last episode ever. So he's the oldest he will ever be. It actually came out in like 2001. So that show ran a pretty long time. And it was only an okay episode. Like, it was okay. But there's a part in it that I would critique a little bit because there's the killer, and he's kind of planning it with his girlfriend, and they're trying to put one over on Columbo. And so they will call each other once in a while and kind of be worried that Columbo might be onto him, which that's like a trope in that show, happens a fair amount even. But what they would do is when they cut to her, she's like sitting by the phone in her apartment, and they do that like 4 or 5 times. And I'm like, okay, they didn't really do that. Like, there couldn't be a spin-off of her character because all she does is sit and wait by the phone. But like, you could have her, like, if she was like in the middle of a pool tournament and she was about to hit the championship and at the same time is trying to juggle talking to her boyfriend about helping him get away with his murder, which, maybe for the purposes of that episode, maybe you don't want to do that because you got to keep the focus or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's like the idea. Like you can just build, and then it can almost get like a little chaotic. Then some of the ways, like even with like King Cryptid, is like the issues become how you focus it. Like you can tell episodes and adventures that are focused, but you do know there's a sandbox you're building that's pretty fun kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, my approach to storytelling on that aspect of it is the fact that there is a world, there's a lot of people that are in it, but at the same time, I want to focus on this moment in time, this day, or these 2 days, or whatever it may be. Rarely do the stories go past even 3 days of time period. And it's very centralized and focused on what is going on with those individuals. I think if you take into scope, well, there's this huge, humongous, large world, and, what's going on here, what's going on there. That's not what the point of this specific story is. Just like how when you experience life, you're largely experiencing whatever is in your peer view around you for the most part. I think that's why social media can sometimes feel completely overwhelming, is that we're being inundated with things from all over the place. And you're like, I don't know what the hell's going on. And then meanwhile, you're so absorbed into whatever else is going on, and you're not focusing on what you should be focusing on, which is what you have to do and what your life is about. But, so it's kind of like that in terms of the focus of the issue. I know that there's other things happening, but this is what we're paying attention to right now. Killer Kovacs has a good point here. Says on the other end, trying too hard to be original can be absolutely devastating for a story. So on that note, I want to build up to this point too. I want to get your opinion on this. Archetypes and tropes. Now, both of those things generally tend to be played so that there's familiarity in a story or with characters. But they also can, and I think we're seeing a lot of this now, they can be purposefully twisted to subvert expectations, usually to the detriment of the story because of how it's being played out. But there's good ways to do that, to take like the big brute and make them not so mindless, to take the scrawny, whoever, and turn them into some kind of powerful being. And those are just very off the top of my head, simple, kind of turning a trope upside down. But what are you seeing out there where twisting these archetypes and tropes in storytelling is being done right?
Yeah. Because you're right, if it gets like too meta, and I wonder if we're coming out of that phase, but I don't know. But it's like, it was a phase
every
for a
time
while
I think
where,
we are, it's like they're diving right back in.
Yeah, like everything was meta, a deconstruction, blah, blah, blah. And then you'd be like, what would be really refreshing is something that was just authentic and earnest, or whatever, not trying to like put one over on the audience kind of thing. But yeah, in general, I like tropes. Sometimes you'll stumble on them and then it'll feel pretty good where you're like, oh, this like feels like cool for the story. I'm trying to think, even like a random example might be like, I think one trope would be like the revenge checklist, where you're not even like killing one person, but you have to kill 5. So if you kill the first, the other 4 are going to know something's up, and then they have to meet and talk about it. And they probably know who it is, and they like the story almost. That's when you can get that feeling like it feels like it's writing itself, and that is
there's
like,
a lot of horror movies that are like that.
Yeah. Like even what is it? I Know What You Did Last Summer, and stuff. And yeah, that is interesting because that would be in danger of being derivative. But they were saying in the chat too, it's like it can be like bad almost to overthink it, because at the end of the day, if you ignore it but focus on everything else, like you focus on your own authenticity that you're trying to bring to it, that can kind of fix the problem anyway.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people might like you'll find tropes where you're like, that one doesn't feel like, I kind of think of it sometimes like the cliche is like the negative thing and the trope is positive, and that's just my own interpretation. But like that revenge checklist, like I'm like, oh yeah, like Kill Bill is like that. I'm like, I'd read a revenge checklist comic today or tonight, That would be kind of cool. Sometimes it almost becomes like a subgenre.
Or like long Halloweens like that.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Even Watchmen's kind of like that.
Yeah, totally. And Watchmen, yeah, the one kind of everyone says is the best. So that can be a fun way into a story. If you think of a trope that doesn't feel played out cliche and it can give you bones for your story, kind of. There's one that's a little bit like that too that I've seen people do versions of is like uh, Treasure Island, which is basically like the treasure map, and then maybe like the anti-hero captain kind of thing where the kid sort of becomes friends with the captain. It's like you could do that, and I guess people may be like, well, it's clearly inspired by Treasure Island, but I don't think people would be, if you do it well, people wouldn't count that against you. They might count it for you. They'd be like, it's inspired by Treasure Island. This is so cool.
Well, now there's the other part of it, right? So if you're diving into public domain territory to kind of get your inspiration, you're a little safer legally. Maybe not
Oh, yeah.
creatively, but legally. But if you're diving into not public domain, something that is very much present and active and being used commercially, and you like, yeah, I want to make Spider-Man, but not Spider-Man. That's where things can go astray. And that's why when some people are like, oh, well, don't worry if it's too derivative, just kind of put your own spin on it and then go for it. You do still have to worry if it's too derivative, depending on how derivative it is and what it's derivative of. So that's where
Yeah.
it's something where I see a lot of creators out there where I'm like, oh man, I don't know if, and over the years I'm like, I'm done with trying to pull people away from stepping in front of these buses because every time I've ever done it, it's killed the messenger time,
Oh, yeah.
and they get super defensive, and it's just they're pissed off at me, and I'm like, you know what? Okay, if it happens, if something happens, you get sued, you get told not to do that anymore, whatever it is, it happens. That'll be
Yeah.
that.
It's like they have to learn themselves, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, and a little bit what we're talking about is if what the audience picks up, that I'll see it. Sometimes you can, if it's like in that cliche zone, that's when you can picture the audience kind of rolling their eyes because they get it. They like, if it is like what's an example? I don't know, like of a more of a cliche is like a racist cop who like beats his wife or something. I don't know, like that's like if that's a cliche. But so the scene is like to kind of establish that the audience would be like, yeah, I've seen this before, I get it. But if you approach it not from like using cliches but more authentic, but if you like introduce just a little nuance, and the nuance alone kind of will flip some of these tropes, like what you were saying with like if it's the brutish guy who's actually a little smart, that will always make the audience go, oh, it's not, this isn't like the crap I've seen a million times. So just a little extra nuance will make them pay pretty close attention. And I've seen examples of that where it's definitely worked on me, where I've been like, oh, you're telling me I can't just immediately tell what the point of the scene is and kind of write it off and roll my eyes. I actually have to watch now.
Yeah.
That's kind of a good
I mean,
thing.
it works really well when you're doing characterization, especially for villains. To give them all of a sudden, it's like, wait a second, they're not entirely horrible. Like they care about their family or their pets or something like it adds these layers to them where it's like they're still the villain. They're still doing something horrible. They're still going up against whatever the hero of the story may be. But they have layers. They have deeper context to their character. It's not just this one-dimensional. They're evil because I said they're evil. And
Yeah.
then that you go about it, and all their motivations make almost no sense because, if anything, the motivations even of villains, they're still doing it out of some way that they're interpreting the world would be better this way if I was just able to do what I want to do. Like they never stop and think for a second that what you are doing to others is not acceptable. But if what they're doing to others was done to them, they would think that was horrible. How dare they? They can't do that to me, And it's like this one-way street in terms of morality for so many different villains out there. whereas the heroes are usually a bit more empathetic, a bit more, or maybe even a lot, and more willing to kind of sacrifice their
Yeah,
own desires and interests
yeah.
for the benefit of usually somebody else.
It's fun when you see that kind of psychology in stories too, like the villains being having blind spots like that, where they think they're the good guy, kind of almost. And what the audience likes to do too is they do like to judge things, and they like it when it's a little harder. So they'll even be judging the villain, and they're like, well, he likes his dog, but he killed that one guy, but that guy was kind of bad in a
Yeah,
way.
exactly.
And then yeah, like that's kind of that gives them a lot to do. They like enjoy that.
Yeah, yeah. That's that interactivity that you're always talking about.
Totally,
You
yeah.
know, you start bringing in them, and that's the part of good storytelling where the story's being told, but you're not being told how you should feel. It's like, here's the characters, here's what they're doing, here's what they're about, here's how they're reacting to things, or participating within the events, and you decide, how do you feel about them, how do you feel about that? Because I love a ton of different villains. I think they're great characters. Would I want to be friends with those people? No. But for
Yeah,
the story, are they fantastic? Yeah, and
yeah.
it's interesting and enjoyable to see it play out within the context of that story. But that's the thing,
Hmm.
that's the difference, though, is that it puts it out there, it sets it up, and then it's like, you decide, do you enjoy this character, or do you not? Do you want to root for them, or do you not? But that either way, you're participating, and that's
Yeah.
what's important.
Yeah, yeah. The second you kind of start it, then where they have that term where it's like on the nose or whatever, where if you try to tell the audience what to feel, they definitely don't like that. And it doesn't mean that you have to do a super gray, wishy-washy and have no morality. You can have the morality there, but people can play with that. And I think as we're just talking, I'm thinking too, stories they kind of give you an excuse to not completely hate pretty terrible people. Like there's somehow stories give you like a little bit of a pass, and that's part of the fun. It's like you can within the context of the story, kind of what you're saying, you still know who's good and who's bad, but you see somebody kill someone, and you're not like you're not. It's not like you're turning it off because you're so mad that they killed someone that you refuse to even platform them and give them, or watch them or whatever. You're more like, well, let's see what they have to say. Let's see what their argument is.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. Yeah, because there's things that happen that and I don't know if it's suspension of disbelief. It's if it's the fact that we safely are feeling like, okay, this is a work of fiction. We can kind of go into this, but even stories that are not necessarily purely works of fiction, stories that are based on nonfiction events, you'll still see these characters, these individuals based on living people, do horrible things. But you want to see, how does this play out, and why did they do that? Now, as you're coming up with characters, especially, and also plots, but mostly characters, what do you think about when I say something like write what you know? What comes to mind when I say write what you know?
Yeah, good question. I was thinking about that today. I'm trying to remember. It's like write what you know, because on one hand you're like, well, that's dumb because I know nothing. I'll be completely paralyzed. Like you're saying, I can only write about. I might know a little bit about like high school basketball because I played basketball in high school. So I'm like, oh, is that all I know? But another way you can interpret it, maybe kind of if this is where you're going with it, even is if you know your characters really well, then you can kind of write that, and you can write their interactions a little more comfortably and confidently. Um, so that's part of. I kind of forget what I was thinking about. Right, what the other day I was just thinking about it. That it's like you need a way to be able to write stuff you kind of don't know, like even if it's like two cops talking or something. Um, and this might be a way to put it is like if you're writing two cops talking, and if you're writing them like, I don't know, like they're using all the cop mumbo jumbo and you don't know any of that, it would just kind of be pretty bad. But if you're writing two cops talking and you're just treating them as humans, uh, that that can be like a lot better. That can be a lot, because then at least you know how two humans would interact, But
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
still might not have the perfect thing way the cops get it or whatever, but and some of that you can catch as you go. But I don't know. There's
Yeah.
yeah.
I get what you're saying. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now within storytelling is cliche advice drilled over and over again without a thought of it. Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen people do the whole like write what you know, show don't tell, and they don't know what the hell these things mean, and
Yeah.
they don't know that there's a time to show and tell, but you got to do it in a specific kind of way, and they don't understand that if you just tell people write what you know, most people that don't know anything, we all don't know anything for the
Yeah.
most part, and we're constantly in a state of learning. But if you have that crystallization, because knowledge is crystallization, that's like, nope, I know what I know, and that's what I know. So if that's it, and that's what you're telling people generally, like up and coming writers, to just stick to writing what you know.
Yeah.
Instead of telling people, look, chances are you don't know anything. So you got to do a lot of research. You got to do a lot of work. You got to do a lot of deep dives into aspects of life and history that maybe don't even, right now, have any interest to you whatsoever. But that is important. And you need to learn as much as you possibly can. So, write what you know can kind of become this poisonous mantra. And I think it really has. I think it's really stemmed in turn to like this cancerous narcissism within creativity, where it's
Yeah.
turned into like, I don't need, the universe is within me.
Yeah. Yeah. It
I
can
don't
get
need to learn about anything else.
it can get interpreted in a way that paralyzes you and stops you from learning anything new, kind of, because you're like, oh, you're telling me I just write what I know? Well, yeah. The
Yeah.
human experience. I know the human experience. I am a human. You know what helps is for sure psychology in general, but it's
Oh, yeah.
like, and that's kind of a little bit weird and broad, but it comes up, and there's some overlap between psychology and sales. Maybe we talked about this before, but I've noticed that like a while ago, and I found that pretty fascinating. I started following some sales accounts on Twitter, and they give all this sales advice, and it's like it totally applies to psychology, and just being a little familiar with some of those concepts can help, like, yeah, like a dialogue scene, if you can conceptualize it, of even if it's like someone being passive aggressive, say, and then someone else kind of not, or they're both being passive aggressive, that changes it. You know how to approach it, and you know what's going on, and it will make it more interesting than if they're just like yelling at each other or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I always talk about the fact that psychology and philosophy are two of the biggest areas of interest that you got to dive into if you're going to write characters, especially. If you want to write not just one-dimensional caricatures, but actually living, breathing individuals within your story that feel like that they've got motivations, they're capable of things, they're capable of even changing their mind. Because there's a lot of characters that are written sometimes where they feel crystallized. They feel like they will never change their mind on anything ever. They're very dependable in terms of like they just will always do this. No matter what it is, they just do that one thing, and you can depend on it over and over again. Now, you can have a character like that, but all your characters like that, holy cow, is that a boring story? If
Yeah.
anything, a lot of the fun of the story of interaction with characters is seeing the different personality types. And if you got a bunch of characters where they feel like, oh man, I'm getting presented new information now, I have to change my mind on how I'm going to go about this. Now, that's a character that's not just this written because I said so character. This is a character now that feels like an actual person.
Yeah, that's cool, and I agree 100%. And it's hard. It can be a little hard. You gotta like remind yourself, and sometimes it's a second draft thing where you look at your first draft and you're like, oh, this guy is just serving a plot purpose.
Yeah.
I need to give him or her back a little bit of that agency of let them do what they would do if they were just a human being or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, Boombot says Narwhal's writing has a lot of humor, which makes his characters memorable. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. There's a funny balance there where, if you add too much humor, it takes away from the stakes a little bit, or it can like pull the audience out. Like that, we've seen some of that with some of the modern Marvel quips kind of thing, quip style.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if you a little humor in there can go a long way. I don't know. I've done both. I've like tried to do some where it's pretty serious. I've tried to do some where it's funny a little bit. And funny, like it'll definitely help the audience like get into it, read further, like it more. Like it's if it. I don't know if you could treat it as like a tool. It's like if you're I would almost always use a little humor unless it was like an exercise to not use humor, which I kind of do that still too a little bit. But.
Yeah. I generally boil down usage of humor, maybe even in real life too, but definitely in storytelling, as self-preservation techniques. Like depending on what is going on with the characters, humor is often used as a self-preservation technique to kind of shelter
Yeah,
them a bit, compartmentalize the things that are occurring, deal with things a bit easier, and
yeah,
provide a bit of this isn't as serious as it may be because I'm not going to treat it as serious as it actually is.
yeah,
Now, that's something that's great, I think, with some characters that really pull that off well. But then there's other characters where if they were to display that kind of sense of humor in that kind of outward way, it would be very strange. But I think every character, even like a character like Batman, there's a sense of humor there in his approach of things, even with his seriousness, because he's so friggin' serious, but he's dressed up like a bat. He's
yeah,
dressed up like and he's gallivanting around on the roofs at night and basically like believing he's this thing so that people believe he's that thing as well. That's you gotta have a sense of humor about that. So even though he's taking himself very seriously within the story, there's kind of humorous elements because of how just it's in your face that this is what this is what's happening. So depending upon how he reacts, and I know some people it might be difficult either for me to properly explain what I'm getting across, but I've always found there's a sense of humor to that without it being jokey, without it being
yeah, yeah.
quippy. It's
If it
it's
can be
something you can look at it.
accidentally funny, that's kind of in some ways the best because that will feel supernatural
Yeah,
and it
like
won't.
he's always the straight man in in
Yeah,
the comedic duo or whatever it is that's going on. Generally his villains. That's why I think they're so over the top, and he's a straight man. You know,
yeah,
you need that. You need the Abbott to the Costello.
yep, yeah, and that gets into what you're saying about even psychology and stuff like that. Self using humor as self preservation is totally a psychological thing. And knowing that that's the concept of the scene, if that's something that's happening, that will make it pretty great and fun to write. And that's also kind of not the type of thing that the audience would necessarily be like, oh, I get it. Like they would kind of be like, what's going on here? And they'd be trying to like dig into it a little bit.
Yeah. You can range the whole gamut of emotion. Are they nervous? Are they cocky right now? Are they trying to distract? Like, what is going on because of how they're playing up that scene and that interaction?
Yeah,
Instead of everything just being, because that's a sign of bad writing too, where everyone is just like wooden and just kind of delivering the line they have, and there's no sense of awareness of the scene playing out. We see it in comics. We see it, I think, a lot more in the art reflecting the emotion, or I should say, maybe not reflecting the emotion of what's happening within the context of a scene. But that kind of stuff is so important.
yeah, yeah. I agree. And oh, one thing with humor too. I think just in my case, speaking of like with Earthbound, it was like certain characters unlock it more, and then that just kind of handles itself. So like for Earthbound, it's like Blogart. He's the guy where if he's in the scene, it can be kind of a funny scene, and no one else is like making jokes necessarily, and he doesn't even necessarily make jokes. His stuff is like accidentally funny, but I'm trying to do it on purpose. But it's him being not self-aware is what makes it funny.
Is it kind of like a no filter kind of a thing, or like a
Yeah,
nervous humor?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, like accidentally saying too much, kind of oversharing, all that kind of stuff. He'll do, and that's all like kind of funny. But that's like his character, so that's like one way to do it. You have the one character that lets you do that kind of stuff, frees you up. That works for wild card for like bad guys too. Like if you have your one character that can actually be super crazy and kind of evil or whatever, can be fun too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You hit upon something that I think is so important. It's the usage, the sparing usage of character traits and personalities throughout your story. And even plots, things like that, where people will go, you write enough stories, you do enough of these things, or in my case, you publish enough of them, and people go, oh, I wish you had more that were like this. And I think every time it's like, oh, thanks, but I always think every time, no, you don't. No, you don't. That's why you really love this one. Because if they were all this way, there would never, ever be that emotion across of like, oh, that really stood out. That was great. And it stands out and it's great because there's so much variety thereof. And then this one comes along and it, for whatever reason, maybe it's character, maybe it's the plot, maybe it's the situation, whatever it may be. Maybe there's a genre that is explored that's not usually explored within the context of a series or a situation. That stands out and automatically kind of makes you go, oh, wow, I didn't know this kind of thing was possible within this story or these characters.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's funny. I typed that. I have a little notes to take away and mull, but it is funny. The sparing use goes a long way. And if you even just imagine like two funny people like trying to make each other laugh, I don't know, like that doesn't like, maybe that could work in, specifically that's what it is for like a podcast or something, but if it's a movie, or a story or a comic, two funny people both talking to each other is not as good as one funny person and one serious person. It's always better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that these are all tools and weapons within your arsenal, and knowing when to use what is so important. Now, I want to go back a little bit when we were talking about developing essentially who you are and learning and researching and all these other things, bringing the essence of you into your writing. For you, how did you go about that? What were some of the things that you did to expand upon your skill set, your knowledge, whatever it might have been, and then incorporate that into your writing so that it felt like it was uniquely yours?
Yeah, good question. There's like two things I can think right off the bat is I did think about like the ego kind of thing related to writing. And early on, my idea was like the goal is almost to have no ego. So the writing is completely on its own and you don't have anything to do with it. And that's kind of weird, but I think that is like a lot of writers might sort of agree with that. I'm not even sure. And then kind of with that, and like exploring like nuances of bringing it back, and if you can get some of your ego in there, I'm not even sure, but so that was part of it. And then kind of discovering the interactivity idea pretty early on and being like, so if the goal is just to like give the audience as many like light bulb moments where they're looking at what you're doing and they're like, oh like whatever, just do as much of that as you possibly can. And kind of you're trying to stay out of it. You're trying to not get on your soapbox, not make a morality call to the audience, and you're trying to not mess with the characters. You're trying to let them be whoever they're going to be. But as I'm saying it, I'm like, there's got to be like a way where the ego is useful and plays into writing, but it's kind of hard to think of. It's like if it's a type of story, well, if it's meta, which we were just saying where we don't really like, but if it's a meta story, then the author's ego always plays into it, and that can still be good. There's good examples of that, but that is like a little bit more annoying kind of.
Yeah, I think we're always constantly bouncing around between ego, id, and superego when you're writing. You know, like that kind of, because ego is like all your preconceived notions about everything through your experiences, and this is the way the world is, and that's how I feel about it, and this is my reaction to it. It's like a bit of like Stoic philosophy in terms of like you're not exactly offended by the thing itself, you're offended by your value judgment based on whatever that thing is or that individual. So it's kind of like when you're working that kind of stuff into your stories and your characters and the situations that play out, you do get a little sense of maybe the author's morality within a certain situation. I think if you can really remove your own morality from something, you can create some gnarly characters and situations. And there are people that are able to do that very well. It's difficult. I've gotten into that headspace with a couple books that I've made, and it's it is not an easy trip. But there's always those kinds of things at play, and I'm thinking specifically at this point for you, was there anything with characters where you wanted to do something, or maybe there was a situation that was going to come about, and you felt like you needed to even superficially, if not fully, experience it to really kind of communicate what that is like, or what you felt like that was like?
Yeah, a little bit. That sort of, I don't know if this is like the inverse, but there's been times where I've been more excited to really convey, and then I'll be like, oh, this is like relatable, whatever it could be. Like, I just, another random example, but if you're working in Photoshop and Photoshop crashes, and you've been working for an hour and forgot to save, like that frustration is so relatable. And so if that ever comes up in a story, it usually has to come up like accidentally, and then after the fact I'm like, I know this one, this is awesome, and I'm like, other people are gonna know this too. But so yeah, it's hard to answer that super specifically. But another random thing, like on the same subject as you're talking, I was thinking is it's like a type of criticism that I've seen on Twitter randomly through like some film accounts where I'm like, oh, this is weird criticism, where what they do, you're almost like, is this like cruel what they're doing? But what they do is they basically like psychoanalyze the filmmaker based on the movie they made. And so sometimes they'll be like, you can tell this guy's like spoiled and maybe racist, like maybe SJW racist the other way, whatever. They're like, you can kind of tell from the movie. And I'm like, what they're doing is they're finding his blind spots, and it can be real searing. I could imagine if someone did that to me, and I'm sure I do have blind spots, and then they would critique something, and because of a blind spot that I have as a person, I would be like, damn, that's good criticism, and I need to figure that out. And that's one thing I'm sort of trying to do as I go, is like, you are trying to not have blind spots for yourself and for the world, which is impossible, but you can like make a pretty good attempt at it. And one of those is even like just being quote unquote a little based, like helps, I think. Like just a little more like you don't knee jerk to conspiracy theories that you hate all conspiracy theories. Like you kind of hear everything out a little bit. That kind of stuff can like help writing a little bit, I think.
Oh yeah, well, it's all about being able to understand that you don't need to accept that there's different perspectives out there and invite them and have them become your own perspective. But you do need to accept that there are different perspectives out there. So, and you see it a lot, and that's just the way I think it's always going to be. But if you want to get in this headspace to be able to create effectively, I think you really do. You need to be able to understand that there's different perspectives out there, learn as much about how those perspectives get formed, and then you can put those into your writing, whether you agree with them or not. I think it's so important to be able to understand how to communicate and understand how different viewpoints get formed, even if it seems like it's the craziest thing that you can't possibly wrap your head around. How do they believe that? Like For me, one of the things is maybe like a flat earther. I am fascinated by that. Fascinated. I don't agree with it whatsoever, but I am utterly fascinated by how did you arrive at that viewpoint. So I'll like look into it and see how do they feel about, why would they think it's this and that and the other thing. What do they think this is in the context of if we have a flat Earth?
Yeah.
And just to see how do you arrive at that viewpoint and that perspective. And I can incorporate that kind of thinking into something, even if it has nothing to do with flat Earth. You can incorporate that kind of thinking into characters. And you can create more of these believable characters that you would never agree with them whatsoever with how they're behaving or what they feel about something. But it feels like, that's an authentic character.
Yeah, because they exist, and you don't want to limit your world to just what you approve of or don't judge or whatever. And then your ability to kind of not judge. I talk to some flat earthers, and some of them, I don't know if they're not flat earthers at this point, because they'll be like, it's not flat, it's hollow. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because that will sometimes solve like some of my things. I'm like, I don't think flat Earth would work because of some of the things going on in the sky and the Coriolis effect or whatever. And they're like, no.
There's all kinds of things. Yeah, but it intrigues me.
Yeah, they're like, no, it's hollow. I'm like, well, okay, I feel like I can't disprove that. So.
Yeah, and then when I'm like, okay, hollow, that fascinates me too. So then it turns into, well, what do you mean by that? And then, they usually talk about like cavernous systems and all these other things. Not that it's necessarily like a ping pong ball that, you just get below the shell and then it's like, poof, nothing. You just infinitely drop to the other side. It's usually like it's more like a cavernous sort of deal and all these different kind of contexts of underground civilizations and inner Earth civilizations. And I'm always like, oh, that's fascinating. And I don't know if it's just because I absolutely love stories and everything to me is a story, but I enjoy seeing the perspectives and the viewpoints on that stuff and having it work into my own storytelling and my own characters and my own plots that I can come up with. But I think it's one of the most important things as a writer to get out there and understand that there's not just people that exist in the world that are outside of yourself, but there's so much that's happened. There's so many even sides to history. Learn as much about all of it as you possibly can and incorporate that into your writing. I don't think that there's people out there that are writing and going about it 100% as fully maybe as they could. And I don't know if that'll happen with time. It's a very strange creative time that we live in now, where it feels like, and I love both sides of it, but it feels like a double-edged sword of you have a lot of access to do pretty much whatever it is you want to do, whatever story you want to make, whatever character you want to make, you could do it. And then at the same side, the flip side of that, it feels like you can't make anything at all.
Yeah.
So it's at the end of the day, I think you just gotta go into it. You gotta make the story you want to make. You gotta do your research as much as you possibly can. And then you also have to have some life experience under your belt in some capacity, whether it's lived or learned, or both is great. But I think that a lot of people really need to, especially when it comes to writing and creating, they need to get outside of their comfort zone, and they got to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. And related to that is like if you're judging in your story, it might be the type of story where you're allowed to do that, but that's like where your ego would bleed in, and that's where you might have some blind spots. Even like sometimes, right, I can picture some writers like not resisting, like if they had like a flat earther character, they would have to have another character come in and say like, yeah, that's not real though, like almost like to the audience, like we know that's not real, like, but that's like a form of lamp shading. I just learned this concept, but lamp shading is
so there's
like
gaslighting and now there's lamp shading.
Yeah, lamp shading is like some of the SJW comics kind of do it, where it's like they'll kind of say something dumb and then another character will be like, wow, that was dumb. And the fact that they bring it up it will kind of make you laugh. You're like, oh, they're smart because they know. But you're like, well, it'd be better if you just made it not dumb in the first place, and then you wouldn't have to bring attention to it. But they'll do that with like, it'll happen with judgments on anything. Like I've seen it even the more middle of the road stuff, like which is good or whatever. But if you have like a character who's meant to be like kind of an asshole or kind of like a little more edgy, like maybe a little racist even, so they say something racist, then I've seen it where they'll have another character come in and go, that was racist. And I'm like, you don't need someone to say that. Like you're judging it when you do that. Like you're bringing your own ego into it. We know it's racist. You can just like let it be. Let that guy be racist because he is, like, whatever. But
Yeah, you know, that's a good point, and I see that a lot more in modern storytelling, and I think it is because of that interjection of almost like this apologetic humor.
yeah,
You know, where like they want to say the thing, and then have a character that apologizes that that we wrote that into the movie or the book
yeah,
or the
yeah,
whatever. You know, that it's like, well, just so you know, there's a character in here that acknowledges that this is bad, which means that
yeah,
I, the storyteller, know that this is bad. So don't come after me because we
yeah,
have a character that said it's bad.
yeah, yeah. And on the flip side, I like if I ever did that, I would feel like it's a valid defense to be like, hey, it's not even me, it's that guy. Like, why are you yelling at me? He's the one who said it. Like, whatever.
Yeah, instead of just kind of, you know, leave things, and it goes for more than just what might be considered offensive, but just leave things, just let them hang, just let the weight of these things sink in, whatever the moment may be, whatever the dialogue, you know, it feels like a confidence issue in storytelling when you see that occur. It feels like you're on the defensive, that there's fear from the storyteller,
Yeah,
instead of just let that's a character that said that, you know. Yeah, you're putting the words in their mouth, but don't you have other characters throughout that the viewer or the audience, the reader, should understand that there are various morals being portrayed here, there's various viewpoints being played out. You don't have to constantly check
yeah.
that just so you know, guys, that's the bad thing to say or do.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, and with any luck, we're getting a little bit back to that. Yeah, I wonder like various points where things have peaked, and you feel like things are going really good. Like, I kind of feel like right before what more or less the SJW era, like 2014 or something. Like 30 Rock was on TV, House was on TV. Like these were good shows with pretty great writing. And it's funny, like even 30 Rock, like Tina Fey, she kind of went woke, and it kind of to her own detriment a little bit. But 2014 things were really good, so I'm like, we can get back there. Like people, it's not that crazy to like get good at writing. I think like anyone can do it, any generation. It's not like we lost it forever, but you get nervous a little bit, and some of it is almost like philosophical, like kind of what we've been talking about is like you're trying to not pass judgment. You're trying to let things hang. You're trying to not overuse stuff, use stuff sparingly. Some of these things, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to take a look at your campaign for a second here.
Nice.
So this is part 2. Part 1's available on the campaign.
Yeah, you can do the catch up. This is Grand Prix, which is the sequel to Earthbound. But these stories are self-contained, so you could actually treat Earthbound as a prequel. Like read this one first, then read Earthbound if you wanted to do that. That's a possibility. This is a good format, by the way, because we talked the whole time, a great conversation, and then a little promo at the end.
Oh yeah, I hate when I'm like, let's look at the campaign for an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
Explain every perk here.
Yeah. Glad we've been getting away from that. I remember those days.
Yeah. No, but this is great. So it's good that you're continuing this series. What's the plan in terms of the amount of books for this series? Oh, 2 of 6 I see here.
Yeah. This story will be 6. They're all double issues, so it's almost like a maxi series or like which is about the same length as the Earthbound. Earthbound was released in 2 trades, and those combined to make like one big graphic novel. And same with this. The 6 it's just 6 double issue floppies, and eventually there will be a sequel to this, and maybe one other book. So Earthbound, the whole Earthbound story, it's like on a larger scale. It's kind of episodic. Like I'm not trying to tell 1,000-page single crazy story, but it's more like three pretty big stories kind of combined. I'm trying to think what's more comparable. It's like more Indiana Jones than it is Star Wars, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes sense. Where each film was kind of like its own complete story, and even though
Yep.
there's a continuity that's larger, they don't directly play
Yeah,
into
exactly.
it. It's not just a continuation like that soap operatic effect.
Yeah. Yeah, Killer Kovacs says Pete should come on Creative Block. Definitely. Have you seen that at all? I do that show with
Oh yeah,
Rini,
yeah. I've
Phil,
been
and
on
Jake.
it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, shoot, he has been.
I was on
Maybe
that
I've
one we
got-
talked about monsters.
Oh yeah, with Phil had you on. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, but anytime you want to invite me back, I'll be happy to come back.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, Killer. It was a good episode. It was fun being on that show and talking about that stuff. Talked about like the whole monster trope and characterizations and all the archetypes of monsters and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And Killer, if you go to Rini's channel, she has a playlist that has every episode because it moves channels, so it can be hard to find the right episode. But through that playlist on her channel, you can find everything.
so this is great that you got a 6-parter here. If you guys haven't checked this out yet, feel free. It's on Fund My Comic. It's got 144 backers, 6,824 raised in the past 13 days, with 34 days to go. And yeah, other than that, I mean, anybody in the chat, did you guys have the first one? Did you guys read Earthbound 1? If so, let me know what you thought about it.
Yeah, Earthbound 1 got pretty good reaction, but it was years ago now. So I almost, in hindsight's 2020 is like, I maybe should have kept the Earthbound thing rolling even sooner. I think I took a year or two
Yeah,
off
because you did
between-
a bunch of books in between, right?
Yeah, and so now I'm getting the Earthbound hype going again. And it's funny too because I think everyone can kind of relate to this maybe. But issue 1, no matter how good you make it, it just can't be that good because no matter what, it's kind of like setup. But now we're getting into issue 2. We're getting into a little more meat, so it's pretty fun. I'm lettering it now. I'm like, oh yeah, there's some good stuff here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Boombots has a question here. Is Percival still a project you're working on?
Yeah, that's in the background. That's another one I had to kind of put on back burner just for a second, though. But by next year, and that one I'm experimenting with traditional art, so we'll see if I can get that fast enough to where it becomes viable. But I'd love to do that. And that's a long story too. I need to do a redraft, so there's still a lot of work. It's kind of intimidating, but that script is 200 pages, which is the longest thing I've ever written. And that's like formatted as a movie. So once you format it, that's like too long for a movie script pretty much. But once you format it as a comic, that'll be a 400-page comic. And that's what I was writing all last year. And so I finished it. I
Wow.
kind of took a break, but it was like a big project. And that was one where the inspiration, it came from one idea, and then that thing had to kind of stew. But it was the idea that the Grail kind of is this godly force that's kind of testing Percival, and it kind of makes him worthy of carrying it by breaking him. So as long as he's broken and like basically hates life, then he can carry the Grail and he can get it back to Camelot. But it'll like disappear. Like if he starts to get too happy, so if he feels like if he gets too close to Camelot, he'll like psych himself out and the Grail will disappear. So he's been trying to get it to Camelot for 40 years. And that's where the story starts. And this is the furthest he's ever been. He's probably actually going to get to Camelot this time. But the Grail is just completely effing with him, and he hates it. He's totally jaded. He hates Arthur. And
Almost
that
kind of
story
sounds
is-
like Book of Job, but with the Holy Grail incorporated
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah, it is. It is like that. And that's Book of Job is one of the rare biblical stories I've read, and it's good. But it's funny. It's Old Testament. That's when God is
yeah.
like hardcore.
Again, I'm not particularly religious, but I absolutely love Bible stories. Absolutely
too.
love it. And the philosophy of Jesus. I think if we could hone in more on philosophical aspects of various religious icons, and individuals for whatever religion, and focus more on philosophy with a lot of it, and less on ritual and less on certain other things. I think that we'd probably have more of a meeting of the minds. But alas,
I agree.
because so many things have been revised over the years like crazy, and different things omitted. Tons of books of the Bible, there's so much apocrypha that's been omitted, and that's not been considered a part of it, even though at one point it was. And it's all fascinating, and the fact that a lot of it's been altered completely to benefit generally whoever was in power at that point of time. You know, it's a lot like what we see nowadays with the altering of stories and whatnot as well that mean something to people. You know, you could just go in there and let's just change that because we want to remove that kind of aspect of it to better reflect what we think it should be like, because we want people to think a certain way now. You know, but if you really deep dive into those stories, they're powerful and tremendous and great stories. And it's a shame that a lot of the time it gets wrapped up in that context that makes people immediately get turned off, which is such a shame.
Yeah, and some of those stories will get kind of buried.
Yeah.
So I'll still discover ones like even like Samson with his hair. Like that's a great story. I haven't done a deep dive on that one yet, but I'm like that's awesome. And I only heard about that story like last year or something.
Yeah, absolutely. 40% Zed has a question. Have either of you read Earthsea? Says that it's a lot of Jungian psychology, and says that the movie's better than the books. I haven't read it. I'll have to add that.
Read it either. Is that an anime
movie.
though? Is it Studio Ghibli did the movie? Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm gonna look up real quick, just to see.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've seen the movie. Not like I've seen it, watched it, but I've seen it around.
Yeah.
I'll have to. You said that the movie's better. I'll have to take a
it's
look
probably
then.
good. I'd be curious. Yet I wonder what the Jungian philosophy playing in.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, 40% Zed, for the recommendation. I'll look into that. But yeah, so before we wrap things up, anything else you wanted to mention? Anything else you want to touch upon?
No, but this was a fun conversation, and then I appreciate shouting out the book, and good talking to you, and that's about it.
All right, no problem. Anytime, man. Always a pleasure. Everybody, thank you guys for being here tonight as well. Your comments, your questions, always appreciated. If you like the show, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed too. YouTube's been kind of throttling subscribers lately. I don't know if you're seeing anything like that, but I'm always seeing like up 5, down 5, up 5, down 5. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But so yeah, make sure you're still subscribed and that they haven't kicked you out. And other than that, I'll be back tomorrow, not here on the Alterna channel. We've got Rob Geronimo launching Blood Realm, issues 15 to 18 to conclude the rest of his Dawn of the Wolf series. I'll be on the Alterna channel with a launch stream at 9 o'clock Eastern with Rob Geronimo. We'll be doing that there. And then I'll be back here on Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern with Russ Leach and talking to him about what he's up to lately.
I'm going to have Rob on my channel soonish, too, to help him promote. That sounds great.
Cool.
He's a good creator.
I like it when the Alterna guys branch out of their little sphere.
Yeah.
Warms my heart.
That can happen more and more, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. I think you guys will have a great conversation.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, and thank you, man. Appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode, and everybody, thank you guys for being here too. I'm glad you guys, or hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed it with Narwhal. All the best to you, Narwhal. I'll see you soon. Talk to you soon. All that good stuff, and everybody else, I'll see you guys soon. Until then, have a great night and an even better tomorrow. Thank you guys, and all the best.